Keanu Reeves walked into the luxury watch store quietly, almost unassumingly. Dressed in his usual understated way, a simple black blazer over a dark shirt and jeans. He looked like any other person browsing the high-end boutique. His long hair and soft smile were recognizable, of course, but the Hollywood icon wasn't trying to draw attention to himself. If anything, he looked like he was hoping to blend in, to enjoy a moment of normalcy away from cameras and flashing lights. The store itself was pristine, the kind of place where every detail seemed meticulously crafted to reflect wealth and exclusivity. The walls were lined with glass cases, each housing timepieces that glimmered under perfectly positioned lights. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne, and soft classical music played in the background. It was the kind of store where even the slightest sound seemed amplified. The quiet hum of a conversation, the soft click of a display case opening, the faint rustle of a shopping bag. Keanu moved through the store with an almost childlike curiosity. He stopped at one of the cases, tilting his head slightly as he admired a vintage watch with intricate detailing on the face. He wasn't the type to flaunt wealth, but he had a deep appreciation for craftsmanship, for things made with care and precision. Watches, in particular, fascinated him. How something so small could hold so much artistry and history. A young employee stood behind the counter nearby, her sharp eyes flicking toward Keanu as he leaned in closer to the display. She was new to the store, eager to prove herself, and she had a strict idea of what a real customer looked like. To her, Keanu didn't fit the mold. His outfit, while clean and neat, wasn't screaming luxury. He didn't have the polished look of someone who could afford what the store offered. She didn't recognize him either. Her world didn't include Hollywood movies or the understated charm of actors like Keanu Reeves. She walked over briskly, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone polite but firm. "Can I help you with something?" Keanu straightened, his smile warm and disarming. "Oh no, thank you. I'm just browsing," he said, his voice calm and kind, as always. The employee, however, didn't seem convinced. She glanced at the watch he'd been looking at, a rare piece worth more than most people made in a year, and then back at Keanu. Something about him seemed out of place to her. "These are very high-end watches," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "Maybe I can show you something more suitable." Keanu blinked, caught off guard, but still maintaining his composure. "That's okay," he said softly. "I was just admiring this one. It's beautiful." The employee gave him a tight smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, but if you're not here to make a purchase, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have a policy about loitering." There was a pause, a charged silence that seemed to hang in the air. Keanu's smile faltered for the briefest moment, replaced by a look of quiet confusion. "Loitering," he repeated, as though he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. The employee's tone grew firmer, more impatient. "This store isn't a museum, sir. If you're not planning to buy anything, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Across the store, another employee, an older man named James, watched the exchange with a growing sense of unease. He'd worked there for years and prided himself on treating every customer with respect. He recognized Keanu immediately. How could anyone not? And the way the young employee was speaking to him made James's stomach turn. But he hesitated, unsure if he should intervene. After all, the young woman wasn't technically breaking any rules, even if she was handling the situation poorly. Keanu, for his part, remained calm. He nodded slowly, his hands slipping into his pockets. "I understand," he said, his voice steady but tinged with disappointment. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." He turned and began walking toward the door, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet store. James felt a pang of guilt as he watched the actor leave. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him. He wanted to say something, to stop Keanu before he walked out the door, but by the time he'd mustered the courage, it was too late. Keanu was gone. Outside, Keanu paused on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath. The city buzzed around him, cars honking, people chatting, the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby cafe. But for a moment, he just stood there, lost in thought. He wasn't angry, not really. If anything, he felt a kind of sadness, not just for himself, but for the young woman in the store who'd been so quick to judge him. He understood that people often made assumptions, that they saw the world through their own narrow lens, but it still stung. What Keanu didn't know was that someone in the store had been recording the entire exchange on their phone. A fellow customer, a middle-aged woman who'd recognized him instantly, had been so shocked by the way he was treated that she'd instinctively hit the record button. As Keanu walked away, she stopped James, the older employee, and showed him the video. James's face paled as he watched the footage. He felt a rush of shame and regret. "I should have stepped in," he murmured. "I should have said something." The woman nodded. "You still can," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You can make it right." James didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed his coat and hurried out of the store, determined to find Keanu and apologize. But the streets were crowded, and Keanu had already disappeared into the city. James stood on the sidewalk, scanning the crowd, his heart sinking as he realized he might not get the chance to make things right. Back in the store, the young employee who had confronted Keanu seemed oblivious to the gravity of what had just happened. She went about her tasks as if nothing unusual had occurred. But the middle-aged woman with the phone had other ideas. She uploaded the video to social media, her caption simple but powerful. Asterisk, Keanu Reeves deserves better. Asterisk. Within hours, the video went viral. Comments poured in from around the world, people expressing their outrage at the way Keanu had been treated and sharing their own stories of his kindness and humility. The hashtag #RespectKeanu started trending, and soon the story was everywhere, on news outlets, blogs, and countless social media feeds. Unbeknownst to Keanu, the world was rallying behind him. But he wasn't thinking about any of that as he wandered through the city, his hands in his pockets, his mind elsewhere. He'd always tried to live his life quietly, to treat people with kindness and humility, no matter who they were. And while he didn't hold any grudges against the young employee, he couldn't shake the feeling that the world had become a little too quick to judge, a little too focused on appearances. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city. Keanu found himself outside a small cafe, its warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. He stepped inside, ordered a coffee, and took a seat by the window. As he sipped his drink, he watched the world go by, lost in thought. But just as he began to relax, his phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. It was a link to the viral video, along with a simple message. Asterisk, you should see this. Asterisk. Keanu opened the link, his brow furrowing as he watched the footage. He felt a mix of emotions, surprise, embarrassment, and a strange sense of gratitude. He hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone care. But as he scrolled through the comments, he realized just how much his presence, his way of being, had impacted people. He didn't know what would come next, but one thing was clear. This was far from over. Keanu sat at the cafe, his coffee cooling in front of him as he reread the comments beneath the video. Some were outrage-filled messages defending him, while others shared personal encounters they'd had with him, small moments when he'd stopped for a photo, helped someone in need, or simply been kind without expecting anything in return. The overwhelming wave of support was both humbling and surreal. He wasn't the kind of person who sought attention or sympathy, and the sudden spotlight on this incident left him feeling conflicted. Part of him wanted to let it go, to chalk it up to a misunderstanding and move on. But another part of him couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just him. Back at the luxury watch store, the young employee who had asked Keanu to leave was completely unaware of the storm brewing online. Her manager, however, was not. He had received dozens of emails from customers and even a few reporters asking for a comment on the situation. The video had reached the news, and now the store's reputation was at stake. Furious and anxious, he called an emergency staff meeting to address the issue. The young employee, Rachel, stood stiffly as her manager replayed the video in front of the team, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment as she watched the scene unfold. "Do you realize what you've done?" the manager snapped, his voice tight with frustration. That was Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves. A global icon, one of the kindest, most respected figures in the world. And you kicked him out. Rachel's face burned as she tried to defend herself. "I didn't know it was him. He didn't look like." The manager cut her off. "That's the problem, Rachel. You assumed. You judged him based on his appearance, and now our store is at the center of a PR nightmare." Rachel felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She hadn't meant to cause harm. She'd just been trying to do her job, to protect the store's image. But now, it seemed, she had done the exact opposite. The manager sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We'll issue an apology, of course, but the damage is already done. This isn't just about the store anymore. It's about how we treat people." James, the older employee who had watched the whole thing unfold, stepped forward hesitantly. "I should have said something," he admitted. "I recognized him, but I didn't intervene. That's on me too." The manager nodded, though his frustration was still evident. "This is a lesson for all of us. We need to be better. Now, I want someone to reach out to Mr. Reeves and apologize directly. Make this right." Meanwhile, the woman who had recorded the video, a journalist named Clara, was grappling with the unexpected impact of her post. She had uploaded the clip intending to shed light on an unfair moment, but she hadn't anticipated the global reaction it would spark. Her inbox was flooded with messages from people wanting to know more, and a few outlets had reached out asking for interviews. Clara wasn't sure how to handle the sudden attention. She wanted to stay true to the story, to focus on the broader message about empathy and judgment, rather than turning it into tabloid fodder. She decided to track down Keanu, not for an interview, but to apologize for any discomfort the video might have caused him. She knew he valued his privacy, and the last thing she wanted was to make him feel exploited. Through a few industry contacts and some persistence, Clara managed to get in touch with his assistant, who arranged a brief meeting. When Clara arrived at the quiet cafe where Keanu had agreed to meet her, she was struck by how unassuming he seemed. Despite everything, he greeted her with a warm smile, as though she were an old friend rather than a stranger who had inadvertently thrown his name into the headlines. "I hope I didn't make things worse for you," Clara said, her voice tinged with guilt as she sat across from him. Keanu shook his head. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said gently. "You captured a moment, and that moment resonated with people. It's not about me, though. It's about how we treat each other, how quick we are to judge. If this can start a conversation about that, then maybe something good can come out of it." Clara was struck by his sincerity. He wasn't angry or bitter. If anything, he seemed genuinely hopeful that the incident could lead to something meaningful. They talked for a while about kindness, the internet, and the way small actions could ripple outward in unexpected ways. By the end of their conversation, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a viral story, it was an opportunity to make people think. As the days went on, the story continued to evolve. The watch store issued a formal apology, and Rachel, the employee who had kicked Keanu out, wrote a heartfelt letter acknowledging her mistake. She admitted that she had been wrong to make assumptions and promised to learn from the experience. Keanu, in his typical fashion, accepted the apology graciously, even inviting Rachel and the store's staff to an upcoming charity event he was hosting to support underprivileged communities. For Rachel, the event was transformative. Standing in that room, surrounded by people who had come together despite their differences, she realized how narrow her perspective had been. She saw how much Keanu's humility and kindness had touched people and resolved to carry that lesson forward in her own life. As the event wrapped up, Clara watched from the sidelines, feeling a quiet sense of pride. The story she had unintentionally helped amplify had turned into something far greater than she could have imagined. It wasn't just about Keanu or the watch store anymore. It was about a collective effort to be better, to treat each other with dignity and respect. Keanu, as always, slipped out of the spotlight as soon as he could. He didn't need recognition or praise. For him, the true reward was knowing that even a small moment, an uncomfortable interaction in a luxury watch store, could spark a ripple effect that brought people closer together. And as he walked into the cool night air, blending seamlessly into the city around him, he couldn't help but smile. The world wasn't perfect, but sometimes, in unexpected ways, it showed its capacity for change. As the evening wound down, Keanu stepped outside the venue, the crisp night air filling his lungs. The quiet hum of the city surrounded him, a stark contrast to the warm energy that had filled the room moments ago. He paused for a moment, reflecting on how a single seemingly ordinary moment had snowballed into something so much bigger. A part of him still marveled at the power of connection, how even strangers could rally together when given a reason, when reminded of what truly mattered. But just as he was about to walk away, Rachel emerged from the venue. She hesitated for a moment, clutching the small gift bag from the event, before finally mustering the courage to approach him. "Mr. Reeves," she called out softly. Keanu turned, offering her the same warm smile that seemed to make everyone feel at ease. "You can call me Keanu," he said, his tone light but kind. Rachel nodded, taking a deep breath. "Keanu," she began, "I just wanted to thank you for being so understanding, for inviting us tonight, and for everything. I know I don't deserve your kindness after what happened in the store. But being here, hearing what you said, it's opened my eyes. I'm going to be better. I promise." Keanu studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful but gentle. "Rachel," he said, "we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after them. You're here. You're learning. That's what counts." Rachel felt a wave of relief wash over her. His words weren't just forgiving. They were encouraging, as if he truly believed in her potential to grow. It was a feeling she hadn't expected, but one she would carry with her for a long time. Inside the venue, Clara lingered near the entrance, her phone buzzing with notifications as the hashtag kindness in action began trending. She had posted a short clip from the event, Keanu's words about second chances and understanding resonating deeply with viewers. But for once, Clara wasn't focused on the numbers or the reach. This story wasn't about clicks or views anymore. It was about change. Real, human change. Meanwhile, James, the older employee from the store, stood near the back of the room, watching the crowd disperse. He'd stayed longer than he intended, caught up in conversations that made him rethink his own approach to customer service and life in general. For years, he'd operated on autopilot, treating every interaction as just another transaction. But tonight, something had shifted. He saw the humanity behind every face, the potential for connection even in the smallest moments. He resolved to carry that perspective back to the store and beyond. As the night wore on, the ripples of the event began to spread further. Social media lit up with stories of kindness, not just about Keanu, but about people inspired by the incident to reflect on their own actions. Strangers shared stories of times they had judged too quickly or failed to step in when they should have, vowing to do better in the future. The story had taken on a life of its own, far beyond the initial video, becoming a reminder of the importance of empathy in an increasingly divided world. The watch store, once the center of controversy, became a symbol of change. The management introduced new training programs focused on customer respect and inclusivity, ensuring that no one else would face the same treatment Keanu had. Rachel volunteered to lead some of the sessions, using her own experience as a lesson in humility and growth. For Keanu, life returned to its usual rhythm, or at least as close to usual as it could get for someone of his stature. He continued his quiet acts of kindness, often unnoticed, always unpublicized. To him, this wasn't about fixing the world in one grand gesture. It was about the little things, the moments that might seem small but could leave a lasting impact. Weeks later, as Keanu sat in another cafe, sipping his coffee and reading a book, a young man approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me," the man said, holding out his hand. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story, it changed the way I see people. I've been trying to be more mindful, more patient. I don't know if it means much coming from me, but I thought you should know." Keanu set his book down, shaking the man's hand with a smile. "It means a lot," he said simply, and he meant it. As the man walked away, Keanu returned to his book, a sense of quiet contentment settling over him. The world wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But moments like these, moments of understanding, of connection, reminded him that it didn't have to be. Change didn't require perfection. It only required effort, one small step at a time. And as the city buzzed around him, Keanu Reeves sat in his quiet corner, knowing that sometimes the smallest actions could make the biggest difference.